This week, we speak with Shaun Lamb from SaaS Institute. In the news segment, WhatsApp Desktop has a bounty of bugs. Dropbox passes a bug bounty threshold. Infrastructure as Code has configuration problems. Twitter and Google deal with data exposures and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Modern software development and deployment paradigms require security testing solutions that are automated, accurate, and integrate into your DevOps workflow. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools, including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker, to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Visit securityweekly.com/synopsys to learn more. Nearly every business today relies on mobile applications, yet the vast majority do not adequately secure them. Once downloaded, mobile apps escape your control outside the secure network perimeter, thus making them easy targets for hackers. Enter GuardSquare. From the makers of ProGuard, GuardSquare integrates transparently and seamlessly into the development process, adding multiple layers of protection to Android and iOS applications, and effectively hardening apps against both on-device and off-device attacks. Request a demo today of GuardSquare at securityweekly.com/GuardSquare. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 95, recorded February 10th, 2020. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Hey, Mike Shima, how are you? I'm still in shock that it's February.
we blinked and January went away, so yeah, February it is. And it's going to be even a longer February because it's a leap year this year as well. So let's see if we can survive. Join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30 through April 1st at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2020 and click the register button to register with our discount code. Our next webcast is February 13th with Sri Sundaralingam, Vice President, Product and Solutions Marketing at ExtraHop, where we will discuss cloud-native network detection and response. Register for our upcoming webcasts by visiting securityweekly.com, selecting the webcast drop-down from the top menu bar and clicking registration. Shaun Lamb works as a principal application security architect at SaaS Institute, where he focuses on application, API, and container security. With a background in web application development, he strives to design solutions that make it easy for developers and administrators to apply security controls. Shaun holds a CSSLP and has presented at conferences such as Triangle InfoSecCon, All Things Open, and will be presenting at InfoSec World in March. Hi, Shaun. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So speaking of your upcoming presentation at InfoSec World, John and I got a little bit of a sneak peek at it, and it touches on some of our favorite topics like secure defaults for DevOps team and building stronger relationships with DevOps teams. So I'd love to right off the bat talk about when we say secure defaults, or maybe more specifically, when you say secure defaults can help us mitigating security problems, what does that mean, and how can we start thinking about these types of challenges?
Sure. Yeah. So when I think about secure by default, I think about designing security into the software development lifecycle. So, you go to conferences and you'll hear about, moving left in the development lifecycle and more focus on design. But, I like to talk in more detail about what that actually means. And so I've tried to develop some different tips in order to to help those that are trying to design security into their applications.
So now I'm going to guess that these tips probably don't involve a long checklist for developers that says, have you done this? Have you done this? What about this? What about this other thing? What about this other thing? And this other thing? Because that kind of sounds like it's a little maybe counterproductive for giving developers a happy day of coding.
Right, right. Yeah, so one of the concepts that I often speak about related to secure design is this idea of security without nagging. So this idea came to me. I was going to a dentist appointment one day, and as I was leaving, the dentist gave me the obligatory, don't forget to floss. And later that day, I was talking with developers. They were designing an application, and I was giving them for cross-site scripting, don't forget to output encode. For SQL injection, don't forget to parameterize your query. And I realized I was sort of nagging, just like just like the dentist there. I think, I've called this security without nagging or security without remembering. It would be nice just to build in certain controls into the application so the developer doesn't have to remember, 17 different things every time they check in code. They already have enough to worry and think about. So security without nagging, and I've got some examples of how that works in practice that I can get into.
Yeah, and I'm going to guess that so all of the well, maybe not all of the OWASP top 10, but there's got to be some better ways to approach the OWASP top 10. And I'm kind of setting you up for this, like cross-site scripting and SQL injection. Obviously, those are, don't write, the nagging can come from don't write all these bad things with cross-site scripting, remember this step, remember this step. But I think you're getting to a different way to actually approach that those problems.
Sure. The OWASP top 10 super valuable, and the cheat sheets go right along with that. If you look at cheat sheets for cross-site scripting, one of the recommended mitigations is to output encode. And I think a lot of times in the security world, we take this approach of we run the security scans and then we go and figure out how to mitigate. What I like to try to do is try to build these things in. And so one example to mitigate cross-site scripting is to pick a library or a language that's just going to do that for you. So one of the things teams will do as they're moving away from monoliths and going more towards microservices, they'll end up with single page apps. And single page apps can they work well with JavaScript frameworks like Angular, React, and there are many JS libraries that do output encode by default. So that's one less thing for developers to have to remember, when they're checking in code. If they don't want to output encode, they have to actually change code. So it's really the flip side. I mean, that's what I mean by secure by default and security without nagging.
And so, and those are themes that John will, I think, remember fondly as we've been talking throughout the last year about different examples of doing that. But I think you also kind of focus on that. That was sort of, here are some libraries, some frameworks to adopt. But perhaps there's a little bit of the idea of maybe not necessarily frameworks or libraries to avoid, but reducing attack surface. Because that's another dimension of this problem, that you can reduce your attack surface and make the devs' lives easier. So, and I think you kind of touch on that too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, once we start thinking about Docker, especially, I mean, Docker's it's a great opportunity. Anytime you're switching architectures, and I think a lot of teams, they're moving more towards Docker and Kubernetes. It's a great opportunity to say, well, what's gone not so great? What's gone wrong in the past, and how can we improve on that? And, one of the things, that has been an ongoing challenge and will be going forward is just patching and upgrading. There's new vulnerabilities all the time. In the Docker world, though, it's a chance, it may be a transition where traditionally an operations team would choose the operating system. In Docker, maybe it's the development team that's choosing what's going to be your base image, what's going to be your OS. And what we've had success with is moving away from some of these larger Linux distros and instead moving towards some really lightweight Docker images. So, it could be from scratch, starting from scratch, or from Alpine. there's other lightweight Linux distros, but just really shrinking down that attack surface and making it a lot smaller. So, this eliminates what I call vulnerability management whack-a-mole, where every day you go and you look and you'll see new vulnerabilities for something as a part of your stack. I'd like to think about it as, for like 100,000 lines of code, you're going to have some number of critical or high severity vulnerabilities on average. So the less you have, the more, and you can look at that from a like an attack surface standpoint. Less is more, and you're just going to have fewer vulnerabilities that are going to pop up because it's so much smaller than a full Linux distro.
So Shaun, one thing that's interesting there is, you're talking about, and I like this idea of let's not nag the developer, let's not constantly be that person that they're like, oh, here comes that guy again. But at least what I've seen when it comes to orgs moving towards the minimal images, if they have, I don't want to call it a mature, but if they have an in-place either DevOps or security cycle already, and a team comes in and says, hey, we want to move from, I don't know what, I'll be calling out people here without naming them. They'll know who they are. Mm-hmm. But if I go towards, we're a CentOS shop and we suddenly want to go towards, UBI or Alpine or something small and tiny, there can be a lot of pushback. Either the teams which run it aren't familiar with it, or, oh my God, a new thing, or is there legal responsibilities, or, all sorts of excuses start coming up. Have you run into that, or what do you think about it? What's your advice for either internally your company or to other practitioners out there trying to do this?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a Dockerized Kubernetes world, lots of things have changed, and you always hear, well, we've always done it with this. We've always used this kind of OS. This is new, and new is scary. But I think, and one of the things that I think security folks can bring to the table is that wider perspective, from seeing security scans over the years. I think it would be safe to say that, maybe we're not winning at the battle of patch management, and there is room for improvement. And I think, a security person could take one of the many security tools at their disposal and make a pretty good argument that maybe we need to try something new. Maybe this hasn't been working so well in the past, and there is this opportunity with a new architecture to address some of the problems that we've had.
And actually,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say there really quickly around what you're saying. It strikes me again as something of interest. Over the last year or two, what I've seen is, as larger orgs get interested in containers, the security folk aren't necessarily those who have strong container experience. So they might see half of what you're talking about there. They might see that there's vulnerabilities, but they don't know the best way to, how do they approach that? How do they tell people? So they're sort of partially, at least for some of the ones I'm working with, hoping that either the devs or the DevOps go, oh, maybe we should switch. So would it sounds a little bit like you might be recommending to the security folk out there to get more involved in that as well, on the container side, and get a little more experience? Or how have you
Absolutely.
seen it?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to be involved in the design phase for an application or system, I mean, I think you have to be somewhat familiar with the technology stack. And I think otherwise it's a missed opportunity to try to ingrain security into not necessarily just the technology. There's a process aspect as well. So understanding the development lifecycle, understanding the build and deployment. And by doing so, I think there's room to make some suggestions about improving things like patching. And I can give one more example related to Docker. So I mean, if you can convince folks in order to use one of those lightweight OSs as a part of your base image, I think there's a great opportunity to have a more natural and elegant upgrade process as a part of building Docker images and deploying them. When Agile gained popularity, you would hear at security conferences and folks say, well, this is probably not a great thing for security. We want to run all of our tests. We want to go through pen testing for every single release. And now code is coming out every 3 or 4 weeks, and developers want to push things to production, and the business is asking for it as well. So with Docker, though, having that base image, there's a term called version pinning. If you can, this is another culture shift. If you can convince folks to not pin to a particular version, not pin to version 3.8.1 of a given operating system, and instead say, let's pull the latest and greatest every time a Docker image build happens, then you're solving one of the most challenging problems in security, which is just upgrading. And you're doing so in a natural and elegant way that typically doesn't cause regression errors. And, from my experience, developers are receptive to this idea as to, help with the upgrade process and also, address those concerns about frequent, monthly agile deployments.
Mm.
That's got to be a great way to also just accelerate the patch management. Because if there's anything that I was going to say that where the security teams probably do more nagging than average on any topic is probably that vulnerability management aspect. So here's a vuln, need to patch this, update this, and so on. And I think what you're kind of getting at there too is that by skipping version pinning, and letting systems update naturally, they're possibly also going to get avoid a longer, like one patch can take care of multiple vulnerabilities. So rather than having to track 5 different patches across several different versions over a 6 months release cycle, or even a year, if that's how long a non-agile, or call them much non-DevOpsy approaches to your OS management are, if that's going to be really painful to deal with. But if you have a release cycle that's going on a weekly basis, is probably pretty aggressive, but maybe even a monthly basis, and those systems are just being naturally upgraded, that seems like just a much easier way to not worry about this long tail of lower vulnerabilities that the security teams are still going to probably bug you or nag you, to use our word of the day, about having to patch.
Right. Yeah. It definitely helps out with that. I think there's also a security testing aspect of this concept of nagging, and it really goes into DevSecOps as well. Having this group of security champions that are going to have access to sort of a next generation type of security testing tool. So since we've started talking about Docker and Kubernetes now, there's a new breed of security testing tools that are geared towards testing all day, every day, in a dev instance of a Kubernetes clusters, or the licensing model is more favorable to DevSecOps. In other words, you can empower your security champions. I try to have one from each development team where they, at a minimum, can go in and they can access that container security tool, see what issues there are in their OS version, as well as the application layer within their Docker container. I mean, you've empowered them now to look at those results anytime they please, auto open tickets and things like that if they're interested in it. But that's, less back and forth, less nagging on the security side, because you've given them access to the tools and they can incorporate it naturally into their development lifecycle.
Yeah, I definitely want to continue that theme of security champions, but I also wanted to do a little bit of a callback to another aspect, what you were mentioning earlier, because I think it ties to security champions in a way, is that we started off this conversation by talking about security teams saying you need a checklist for this, and hey, developers, you should be aware of this about cross-site scripting and this about SQL injection and so on, and that built into that sort of nagging and that knowledge that security teams are trying to instill into developers. But when we're talking about Docker and containers, for example, you were also mentioning, you and John both pointed out, it's kind of good for security teams to have their own checklist of just technologies. Like, they need to be learning about the engineering and the development side of these architectures as well, so they know what's going on with containers, so they can understand about how the architecture is being put together. And so it's not like the DevOps teams are nagging security teams. It's more of setting up expectations that for as much as DevOps needs to learn security, security needs to learn about DevOps. And I think now I want to pull that back again to talk about these security champions that you're introducing, and what's been just some of the ways that you identify and work with a security champion. How do you find that person that should be a champion?
Right. Yeah. So, and we try to have a security champion within each one of our development teams. We do take a very developer-oriented approach to security champions. Mm-hmm. I feel like if we're trying to emphasize securing things at design stage, it's developers who are making most of those design decisions. And so we try to recruit one from each development team Hopefully for, a development team of 6 to 12 people, that you'll have at least one person on the team who's super interested in security and they're willing to come on board. If not, we do bring donuts to the monthly education sessions, and I think a little bribery goes a long way, I think, at least in terms of donuts and sweet treats. So yeah, I think bringing them in, and then the other aspect of our Security Champions program is that we really try to take a positive approach. We want to recognize security champions and their development team as their, if they come up with like a clever implementation or a clever mitigation for some security issue, we try to have them come to our education sessions, present alongside with us, and really, at end of year, recognize those folks through like a quarterly security champions kind of, quarterly security superstar, let's say, and really make sure that they're recognized for participating.
And I think that part of a successful security champions program isn't really just the method of getting one of the developers to now spread security propaganda, and here's all the security things that need to happen. And we've shifted from the security team nagging to, the champion and one of the developers nagging. It's not like that at all. I think what you are kind of talking about too, or going to talk about in your presentation, are finding ways to make security benefits be part of natural decision making, or part of the engineering trade-offs that are naturally happen as different teams are getting together trying to work on initiatives, or trying to work on new features, or work on new architectures. So I think, do you have some examples of how you would leverage security champions to work on security topics that are actually, more heavily weighted just to engineering that helps everyone?
I gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I think that, now I'll say that initially when I started the security champion program at SAS, I thought it was going to be a whole lot of me, communicating information. These are the things from the OWASP top 10 and other security sources. It turns out that by establishing those relationships with security champions, that they've come over and they've proposed solutions. Oftentimes they're really clever. For example, we'll talk about file uploads. So file uploads, there's a list of security issues that come along with file uploads. There could be path traversals, there could be site defacement. You have to worry about malware and having malware protection. One of our security champions came to us. They said that we have this new application. We need to allow folks to upload files. And I started listing these issues, and they said, well, you know what? These aren't actually binaries. Essentially it's just property files and other structured data that we need to upload. And they went and found a UI library that would convert over, give you that file upload kind of experience. But it was taking that data, putting it so you could do a JSON, REST API post, and that really just, you're avoiding all those different types of vulnerabilities by avoiding file uploads and a proper file upload. So I think that just having those relationships, working with them, partnering with them to come up with solutions is really helpful, and you'll end up with better security controls by getting their input and working with them.
A quick leading question. I think this could be sort of interesting, because I think this whole thing around security champions, especially in some of these larger, so let's get back maybe if we can for 30 seconds after this, but think about what would you do with, how do security champions fit into a smaller org? But first question on, if we keep them in our head, first a question on, this position in a larger team, would it be fair to say they probably have a better understanding of the security issues which affects them or which might affect them in their particular product or area of a product, versus the security guy he's got OWASP top 10 stuck in his head, right? So he's not going to be as he could be a lot more focused, and that's one of the things that security champion can bring. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think we have a range. We have a couple dozen different development teams, and we've got folks that have been the security champion for a while now, in some cases years, and so they have learned over time, in greater detail about OWASP top 10 issues and other common problems with the application security side. And so we have some folks who are willing to contribute. Another example I'll give is we've had security champions who are willing to partner with us and create sort of reference implementations, or like really kind of a template that other developers could clone. So you might have a less experienced developer or less experienced security champion who maybe they're not familiar with cross-site request forgery or remote code execution vulnerabilities, but they know that by cloning this project that this other security champion has worked with the security group on, that they're going to just inherit all of those things. It's another example of secure by default, and it helps address the problem where you have, you're always going to have a range of security expertise amongst your developers. So it helps solve that problem as well.
That's a great example, because it's bringing that experience, just also what John was leading into, that experience of the developers into the security realms, to say, you probably have that context about your app. What could you do better for it? What could that better default be? I'm curious too, Shaun, if there's other areas, since security champions, since developers are living within their CI/CD pipeline, within their Git tools, do you have some other examples that could come out of just what engineers do on a daily basis, but can change a bit in their processes or in their tooling to make these either guardrails a lot stronger, or the secure defaults a lot better?
Yeah, I mean, related to CI/CD, I think there are ways to kick off security testing tools, from whatever CI tool that you're using, and that can be valuable. Getting back to John's question, whether you're a smaller org or big org, having those kinds of processes in place are valuable. Especially even smaller orgs, they're probably creating dozens of microservices, where in the past you might have a big monolith. And so you want to have these clonable templates, both in terms of the application source code and projects, but also in terms of your security testing through your CI pipeline. So I think having those in place, both from a clonable and easily getting started perspective, it's just automation. It's about speed and help incorporate security by default.
It's also, I'm going to guess, that building automation, extolling the virtues of automation, also helps so that production systems receive code through the natural deployment process, through security testing that you're describing, and other, just other QA testing, acceptance testing, so that interacting with prod by humans becomes much more of an outlier, becomes much more of a rare event. And I think that both helps the security team, because they can build stronger alerts and more reliable signals that, hey, a human has touched this production machine. That's curious. Maybe we should investigate this, or that should trigger something to investigate. Whereas just automation into deployment from the DevOps team hopefully just makes things a lot more repeatable, a lot easier, a lot more predictable as well, and takes a lot of burden off them, rather than the expectations they have to debug or to go through a whole bunch of manual steps every time they want to release new code.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. So I talk often about looking for the win-win from a security standpoint. It's easy for a security person to go and do a presentation and say, in the name of security, we need to do X and Y and Z, and sort of list off things as the passionate evangelist. And what I found is that it's easier to be ignored, when you're doing that. But if you can go up and you can say, hey, we want to have our CI tool as the sole source of deploying applications, that's going to be great for security. I mean, it's going to reduce the amount of possible shenanigans that could happen in a production environment. But also, you're going to reduce human error. There's going to be less configuration mistakes, or you're reducing that case where this works in this test and stage environment, but suddenly it doesn't work in prod. I mean, it's an example of a win-win. And I think those are the kinds of initiatives that developers are more likely to buy into and be supportive of.
Are there other ways that you would recommend obtaining that buy-in, how you would present these types of initiatives? Or are there other examples that you present of just ways that people can think about, here's a great example of something that's a win-win, and here's how I would get some buy-in for this?
Yeah, so I think that your security education program, it really should tie into the way that you're approaching designing secure applications. So let's say that you, for the first time, you get your CI pipeline built out, so it's the sole source of deploying, and it's working well. And the development team is happy because they have button-click deployments and fewer configuration errors. And then you take that to your security champions group, and the monthly meeting is about this success story and how this is a win-win. And so you're that developer is presenting, you're giving kudos to their manager, saying this person is, not only can they write the code and implement business requirements, but they're taking initiatives and maturing our security posture here. So I think reinforcing that through it's a positive approach that works better, and there's less nagging, less finger wagging, as often is the case from security folks, at least on the vulnerability management side. It's a way to incorporate things in a positive way that makes developers much happier than being nagged.
We've been talking about architectures as a bit of an abstract, and without going into details of perhaps different types of architectures. But you have talked about containers quite a bit, and one of the one of the architectures that I'll say can emerge from containerizing applications is microservices. So you can break down the components of very complex applications into this service, this other service, and so on, and they interact with each other. In all of this discussion and the way that you've been working with security champions, presenting secure defaults, are there other ways that you've approached this particular type of architecture or application design approach with microservices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think with microservices, there's an opportunity to use a common security pattern, which is a proxy. Web application firewalls have been popular for a long time, but specific to microservices, there's a more specialized web application firewall, which is an API gateway. OWASP has a great top 10 for API related issues. One of those, as an example, is rate limiting. So API gateways do an especially good job of allowing you to say, this particular user can only make so many requests per minute. That's been a big win for us. Bots are, an unfortunate reality in internet-facing systems. So they make a significant amount of traffic for any internet-facing application. So that's one method to deter bots and to limit, noise traffic from non-human users. So that API gateway, it's crucial from a rate limiting standpoint. If you look at some of the other items on the API OWASP top 10, they're related to essentially access control, object level authorization. Those are problems that you can mitigate with an API gateway. Oftentimes, API gateways have built-in integrations to identity systems, so you're doing your authentication check there, preferably with JWTs and some kind of OAuth type of flow. So there's just a long list of security policies, or in the DevSecOps terminology, guardrails that you can put at your API gateway layer.
So here's a question, and I understand that the answers can change very on context, but who would you have operate that API gateway? Would that fall under, for example, the security team or the DevOps team?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I think that's going to differ from organization to organization. For us, it made sense for the security team to propose policies, custom integrations, for example, between the API gateway and the identity tool. But it's another operations team with on-call resources they're the ones that are going to administer it. Similar to you might have a load balancer or some other type of server that would handle redirects and validations and things in the past. And this is an API gateway is just a sort of a newer version of that with more security-oriented policies.
Cool.
It's funny. What I was chuckling at there really quickly, it's, usually when I think API gateway, the first thing I think is a public cloud service provider, right? So frequently as I do here on the show, when someone else is talking, I'll start Googling around and looking at things. And yeah, there's a few open source API gateways out there. So if people don't necessarily want to run that type of thing themselves, there's other options, but it's, it's an interesting little area to play in and figure out how do you do that right? Because so many of us are concerned about, do we want to be tied into a single cloud provider or not, and all that type of thing. So looks like there are some options, free and paid.
Yeah, there definitely are options, and there's kind of two separate set of related tools. You have your API management tools, which could focus more about just measuring usability and metrics and even monetization, so you can sell your APIs. And then there's the more security-oriented API gateways. They're both open source versions of those and things that the big cloud providers will sell. Specific to Kubernetes, there's this interesting sidecar pattern where you can put an API gateway there as well. So there's no shortage of options. But usually in one or the other, there's some built-in out-of-the-box security policies that you'll get from one of the gateways, and then the ability to customize and add your own policy specific to your organization.
Well, if our listeners have questions specific to their organization and they're attending InfoSec World, I think they could come find you, can't they? So do you want to share any more teasers about your presentation or any more details about where people can find you next?
Yeah, so I will be at InfoSec World, and I'll give a deeper dive perspective on mitigating at design time. That's the name of the talk coming up. Really go into more detail around Docker and Kubernetes and some other guardrails that you can employ. I'll get into UI security a bit as well, and then break down, from the OWASP top 10 and the API OWASP top 10, how can you just go ahead and check boxes so that you're secure by default as much as possible. So we'll throughout that process really design an app from scratch and end up with a secure architecture that checks most of those boxes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Shaun. This is a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. I want to thank John as well. And I want to thank all of your listeners here and remind you to make that dentist appointment, because the toothbrush of truth is listening. We're going to take a quick break now. We're going to return with news of the week.